Hello everyone, today we talk about the sacred fire of Vesta for our moral compass reorientation series that I started for the Jubilee and that however has widened into something bigger about Roman tradition, paving the way for many other in-depth videos, not just in fact on Roman religion, but how this informs our metaphysical condition. Of course I could, for those who have subscribed in the last couple of months that have missed maybe the first part, of course, talk over and over again about the importance of Romanity in a metaphysical sense for literally everything that we're discussing on this channel, not just Roman history, but say conventionally intended in an ancient sense, but the same medieval one, history of religions, the history of tradition, if anything, and also contemporary events. Right, Schwerpunkt is partly conceived and properly from some of the most absconded, let's say, meanders of my own character for this sort of Plutonian, partly Plutonian, but also relatively patronizing trait of mine in teaching that aims at a reassurance, as most traditional doctrines really are conceived for, even when they are objectively designed to unsettle, but it's always in an instrumental sense. Reason for which I will not even attempt to explain further this aspect. If you follow the channel's direction, your path will lead you exactly where we need to be. Right? In any case, Vesta's sacred fire and the secret of perennial transfiguration are really the cornerstones for a reevaluation of the West in its current status, consequently of the world. This endeavor amidst the current turmoil pretty much everywhere is vast and must be approached internally rather than externally to ensure lasting and meaningful outcomes. Also, moments like these in a traditional perspective are actually not the ones of agitation, but actually the ones in which the steadiness of the spirit can shine in manifesting providence, thus literally the capacity of envisioning what is happening on a longer range, thus knowing also how to move accordingly. In fact, this may be one of the most calming moments that I can think of, right? Some others were sort of more mundanely difficult to accept, and we're talking about moments very much connected with the same crisis in a causal sense, that brought to something that will not probably reach a breaking point, excuse me if I'm so hermetic, and exoteric in a sense, but the sense is that what we're going through right now is much more like of an opportunity than anything for actually everybody involved, which does not, of course, drive us away from the need to fight and compete. But exactly in the sense that if you believe in the foundations of the West in a truly metaphysical, aka Roman sense, you cannot feel lost. On the contrary, this is the moment in which that light will shine just like Vesta's fire, the greatest. This is the moment in which it burns the hottest. This, of course, requires in part a new vision, consequently a new action, essentially a revival of the ancient and enduring principles of Rome from one side, but also what this entails in a broader sense. The restoration of tradition should carry universal significance, for example, evolving under Roman guidance and advancing steadily and profound. Something which apparently, people seem to be driving away, like this, the also traditional awareness of the gradual degradation of the system by the breaking up of polities in ever more sort of perceived exclusivistically perceived sense in an essentially narcissistic downward spiral without understanding about divine origin may seem like, in fact, the push towards the opposite direction. Is this the end of the world? We may not know. Everybody, say, in history thought that at some point in their lifetime this could be the case, but there have been, in fact, much worse moments also in recent history at a point. The picture here is definitely one of general collapse, but the possibility of rebuilding some awareness from those who are at least able to treasure tradition and to be willing to initiate themselves through it. So devoid of any other burden, fundamentally, and accepting the hardship that it entails, the essentially denial of the transient self and the requisition of a transcendental power, if, of course, this can be achieved. Many mystics deemed this to be practically unfeasible. I've always been against this vision. I'm not a particularly optimistic person in general, but I'm not a pessimistic one either. If anything, much of the aforementioned tranquility stems from the fact that whatever happens in the world right now, it's not something that surprises me, like, not in the sense I told you this would be the thing. It's rather, nothing surprises me in the sense, in the way it is happening, right? Maybe it's because I'm a historian as well, and so I'm habituated to observe, to look at specific indicators, and to make a broader assessment cutting through the political noise that is definitely not useful. In fact, we're not in any particularly strange situation either. In fact, I shouldn't even present technically this video in sort of more dramatic fashion than is necessary. But the topic in itself, beyond, in fact, the earthly dimension, requires such gravity. Now, this process of restoration of tradition involves naturally reviving sacred wisdom, safeguarding the temple from the profane. Profane is a word that I think perfectly describes the universe in which you're fundamentally dependent at this point. Like, just open social media and see what the mechanics behind that is about, what kind of influence you're exposed to. That again may on the mentally feeble feel overwhelming. That's a very good discriminant to see exactly here who is called to safeguard the temple from those who aren't just going to spire further down. In fact, one of the actual consequences, normally also these times in history, regardless of how things could evolve in a societal sense, is the reestablishment of a traditional society organized according to a natural and truthful hierarchy of castes. Right? I've never talked about castes on Schwerpunkt per se, other than, we talked about Vedic religion, we talked about, say, Hinduism as well, but in general, that's just a reminiscence also in today's conventional references to the actual meaning of this. Now, this approach enables a harmonious coexistence of both contemplative and active lives. Remember that this is always a corporative, complementary, functional, and in fact tendentially divine harmonic system, fostering mutual support rather than conflict, right? The point, again, of maintaining that what would have been called in Hellenic literature properly as apatheia in front of the world today is exactly about this. It's exactly incarnating the necessary wisdom that derives from the balance of contemplative and active behavior, with priests and warriors within also the same soul as the fundamental basis, legitimacy, and assurance of a holistic traditional framework, right? Priests as the custodians of wisdom and warriors as the holders of power across both contemplative and active realms. Because again, you couldn't be one or the other. The priest does fight a lot. The warrior does contemplate a lot. And we observed this in many videos about medieval warfare and religion. Now, it's a metaphor of divine completion and also of human nature in its degraded status. Now, without embracing the Roman tradition, the West cannot reclaim its unity, first and foremost, as this tradition embodies the most cohesive fusion of the dual orders that Europe cannot simply replicate or reduce to a singular entity without such acknowledgement. That's also why I'm so specific when I discuss the Guelph-Ghibelline struggle, as people fundamentally confuse the also like Nietzsche could do in his Birth of Tragedy, like as if there was an Apollonian and a Dionysian that first of all did not exist within each one of us, and also like, you know, the full completion was just Apollonian without the tamed Dionysian underneath. There are different metaphysical dimensions, as we have seen in different videos. While a singular case, the priests might suffice in some cultures. This is a fitting example for many of the questions I receive regarding the East, orthodoxy, whatever. Of course, orthodoxy is better than atheism. That's also why, for example, Ukrainian society is much more religious than the Russian one. And, you know, the consequences have been seen. But the that notion that fundamentally the East would incarnate this kind of greater wisdom of completion of harmony or balance is simply denied. I'm talking also Far East up to the Asian one by the same relation in which it was posed towards the West. It was the West who took over, and there is a reason why that was the case since Roman times and before, by the way, with Alexander, etc. In any case, exactly for this reason, like for those peoples, it could suffice. Not, as you know, in the recent video about the Slavs, the Byzantine influence, etc., I explained how most Slavs do fit a Western reality, including the Unite Church, Ukrainian history, etc. So when we're talking about the West, I promise I will come back on this topic on some other occasion, but we're talking about something that very often is misunderstood in conventional terms today, and a bit of clarity should be made about. Again, I made lots of videos on the topic, so you know what I'm discussing. Reason for which, unlike any other culture in the world, essentially restoring the traditional unity in the West relies necessarily on rectifying the spiritual and temporal realms and ensuring that individuals not suited for these roles by clear natural abilities are excluded from the first two cases. And in practice, like from basic civic rights, if we were to make it conventionally intelligible, at least in a directional sense, in ways that, again, I will not explain nowadays, like how I would do it politically or institutionally, but that I think will just come into being, especially if such coming back will be at least partially possible. I mean, there are so many practical reasons that elude traditional thinking, or at least that would be self-evident by a large degree, even without recurring to traditional wisdom, right? There are just people who do not know, all right? Like, again, there is a lot of fake sort of mindset out there, literally like spamming bots that are specifically designed, in fact, to do what? To push actually people in a direction rather than another. That's not the objective. That's not the outcome. All right. Maybe, in fact, post-traditional cultures will think that it takes, I don't know, to spam this absurdities like complete lies, etc., because they come from cultures that lived at the outskirts of the West, only in this slave-like subjugation for which they cannot do anything but lying, and therefore achieving no power whatsoever. But if this makes leverage on, like, say, the lesser people of our culture, of course, this is obvious, again, with humanity at large, this can further degrade the quality of these people. And so basically having a total chaos rather than, again, changing of, of power, of regimes, whatever. This is not really the moment in history. I think it's self-evident that this is not the moment in history for such takeovers. If anything, this is a moment in history for further degradation of power. This is what normally happens at the end of very expansive cycles, right? That there is no actual fall into somebody else's sphere of influence unless on a limited basis, and mostly due to the actual reinforcement of powers that had pre-existed and had historically been the most structured ones. This is normally what happens. It may seem that in there the crisis is bigger. It's like, I don't know, the Jacquerie during the 100 Years' War, this kind of things. But if you look at the progression, especially of Western history, that's evidently not the case. And this is, of course, if you rightfully believe that the West has the God-given legitimacy to rule over the rest of the world, as it's been already the case. Now, we will have to talk about the Roman fasces, the Lictorian acts, as symbolizing partly this balance, right? Capturing the completeness of the annual cycle as illustrated by the 12 rods, just like the 12 months, which also inform the Trinitarian notion. In fact, numerologically speaking, 12 can be read also as 1 plus 2, necessitating thus the restoration of traditional unity through the reintegration of the distinct powers of both spiritual and temporal authorities. I recently made a video about the noumena rituals in ancient religion, the Lord of the Self mastered by the Ars Regia. And when we look at the aforementioned contemplative and action-based order, you understand that, again, the 1 plus 2, also in a Trinitarian notion, is the sum of those. It's all in one, but it derives from the contemplative element, allowing action to and vice versa to complete towards the more perfect form, right? It also represents, in the doctrine of the two natures, the one and only, that is God in the higher nature, and the two cases that are able to reboot the system, so plus 2, in the priesthood and the warriors. So each of these must operate within its domain while agreeing to uphold universal Romanity. If you don't know, of course, my view on Romanity, again, if you're a recent subscriber, you don't literally have no idea what I'm talking about, please check out the History of Religion playlist. Listen to everything I've uploaded on ancient Rome, Roman tradition, Romanity, and understand why I'm talking about this. Because, again, I literally have people coming to my channel, Schwerpunkt, and making a sense, but I don't know, I don't like the Roman, where are these levels, right? And so I have no other words that especially would prolong my presence on YouTube if I were to comment on it. Nevertheless, let's say that the establishment of a stable and enduring order in the West is definitely unattainable without dismantling the antagonistic forces that have sought to obliterate the two traditions united under the hidden identity of Rome, neglecting her universal role, which is the secret of her strength and destiny. And we're talking strictly from a military point of view, right? It may be completely random that we are very humanly toying now with rearmament in Europe, with all the vicissitudes of the situation, etc. But here we're talking really a metaphysical vision. It is absolutely good for Europe and for the West. I'm not making it an antagonistic matter with the United States. I think, again, that if you are able to eliminate political noise, actually what is even happening right now is absolutely not accurately described by let's leave aside the most blatant, for example, pro-Russian propaganda, but say even the the one reacting to the idea that Trump is harming us, etc. Surely he's doing, things in very, debatable ways. Let's put it in this way. You must understand that also in terms of sort of domestic policy. Not only, however, obviously enough, especially as far as these international issues obviously show, but language is often like what people are fixating on without actually doing anything. So contemplation is good, but action should mirror any kind of actually acquired wisdom. This is a mission that ultimately has to encompass the world war. So recovering the notion that objectively a people ruling over another, if this manifests, right, as such, is fundamentally viable in fact, ultimately successful outcome. So there is not the destruction of the people. There is not the sense of, for example, annihilating an entire country, committing genocide, but actually using that force to transfigure to a higher level of quality is truly something that objectively you don't see anywhere in the world. Surely no other culture outside the Western one has minimally any trace of hinting at any of that. But that I truly believe that the West has truly the God-established duty and mission, the truly evangelical mission, literally intended in the imperial sense, if you know what the Evangelion entailed, to fulfill. Now, the flame of Vesta, in its metaphysical burning, remains safeguarded within the temple. Right, so your relation with spirituality, with religion, with the church, but in a general sense, in a way that can be mastered, in theory, at least traditionally wise, through your own exercise of the right, is absolutely central to all of this. Right, this temple, as you know, is sustained by the virgins who eternally nurture its fire. That was the entire Vesta's tradition was about. This eternal flame continues to burn among the wise, the holy, and the ascetic individuals who have transformed the world within themselves, redeeming society from barbarism and aligning it with the immortal essence of Rome. Beware also of those who fakely wave the banner of Rome when this actually does not add up in strictly, in fact, traditional terms at all. Right, history is really not an opinion. Right? It's not a matter of cheering which side, which team, whatever. I will not digress in sort of the which powers are sort of more, they are closer, let's put it in this way, to that kind of orientation, but we're talking within the West, so everything should be really clear. Now, the temple remains, of course, distant and elevated, but in the weak, brutal, and unreflective age, departing from, say, distancing from the divine, right, making it a considerable and almost heroic task, definitely to rekindle the same Vesta's fire for the world and protect it within the temple under the stewardship of the 6 virgins. This effort aims to mend the systematic destruction that has plagued Europe since the conclusion of the Middle Ages at large, potentially averting the catastrophe threatening the West and halting the alarming decline instigated by individualistic and what we call, in fact, this would be forte state distortions, right? My point has always been that I think that the term democratic is misused, as lots of others, also because of essentially of a communistic, Marxistic imposition of us, right? If you're a traditionalist, you know you can't be a capitalist by definition, in the sense that capitalism is a word invented by Marxists to steal your wealth. That's basically the only thing, that there isn't such a thing like capitalism. What the hell that even supposed to be? In this sense, there is a degeneration into slavery, also in what we conventionally call democratic societies. But the term democratic is not correct, because objectively there's not such a thing like a true rule of the demos, of the forte state. That would be possible only in a communistic world in which nobody ever lived, really. And when we evaluate the power of hierarchies, of elite, of oligarchy, of a truly nobility establishment, regardless the sense that people think, especially today, if you open X, that's mostly a US thing today, but I know that many Americans know better, are the elites in the sense of there is the terrible state that stole you. Where were you as a people when that happened? And what do you think it's actually going on right now, that you will personally require more liberty because somebody's doing that for you? That's not really how it really works, especially when there is an ostensible lack of actual traditional knowledge. You can be a conservative, you can do whatever you want, and aside from half-developed human beings that have mental illnesses and pretend to run the world through that, let's say that being conservative is not enough. Like, conservative is not equivalent to traditional, and they are not to say radically separated, categorically separated things. They may overlap, but they overlap, if they do, in a hierarchical sense, not in a value of, like, I'm just from that side of the aisle, reason horizontally. That's actually a quite democraticistic view of power that is really the theory, right? I'm happy to live, say, in the West in the sense that, because what we call democratic as a misnomer is actually, unfortunately, not a democratic. Power is based on the decisive moral majority of the people, which means that the better ones come to dictate eventually what to do, because lesser people literally have no clue and no power, given that the only power that exists in the world derives exclusively from God. So there is no alternative gnostic force that operates behind that, right? The only force that operates, sometimes, of course, in a stupid sense, is anything that is alive and does something that may seem that dumb, to the point of evil and maliciousness, but it's actually also just a lazy way for us to simply claim, oh, well, so that guy is evil or bad. It's not just that, right? It's because that person may be so faulty that it's actually our own fault not to be able to fix, and so it's not like we have to rejoice too much for ourselves. And so what we are actually witnessing whenever we see any attack to the West is the actual democratic force coming to erode the West from the external, right? The lesser people, the fourth estaters, people come out of, communistic totalitarianism. What do you think these people have in their brains? I mean, seriously. That are truly, in fact, distortions that aim to replace true freedom, that only and fully belongs to God, and that, in fact, is self-evident given the slave-like indoctrination in which these people are traumatically subjected in the countries in which they live, regardless of what they would like to claim on X, just for that matter. Because that's how much it's sort of weird. It's what I always say, that you shouldn't be flattering yourself that much if you've just finally gotten rid of a leftistic regime, considering that the regime literally was born and bred in your own country and your people were subject to it for so long. It's not like now things you have changed, you have paid for your sins. You're just the same lesser people that allowed that and just swung in another direction, fortunately, but that has still all the filth and the lessertness ingrained into the genes. And so this is not something you can't use at any point to mask your failure. Hence, when you look also at other people, that's what I always say, it's not just the fact that if your left sucks, it's also because contemporary your right sucks by that scale. But that, as always, within superior cultures, lesser people are always going to bond with inferior cultures outside of your own. Always remember that. It's the same identical dynamic. And so this notion of making up a reality by inventing a new world order every week depending on X trends is just the same symptom of leftists literally thinking that they are of the opposite sex just because they wish for it. It's the same mental illness that belongs to your culture, right? And you should fight, and you can, as long as you're alive, that is God's grace. You should be extremely grateful and mindful about this, knowing how to use that in order to fix the issue. But it requires you to spit blood, right, and to sweat tears, right? So it's not something that ends there, right? And so that's the reason also why humanity keeps rotting and degenerating in the world. So this barren enslavement emerging from the neglect and misunderstanding of the profound symbols within Roman and especially tradition as such, that of course after Augustus this became synonymous, but hence also the Ghibelline Empire, etc. But it's so self-evident today just for the fact that nobody talks about this. Nobody even thinks that the issue of this all derives from just a historical perspective, also because people have stopped having any kind of historical literacy, which is one of the main causes, at least from a contemplative side of this failure. Now, the flame of Vesta has never been extinguished, by the way. Were it to be, the entire West would have already fallen, for true salvation requires maintaining genuine connections with the divine. The world would have already fallen. Rome would have already fallen. Remember that if Rome is there is hope for the world. That has, of course, also to get its act together as a consequence. And so not just wishing for something to happen from there. You have to make yourself God, if you're able to, by being rewarded by God as such. Now, the flame burns hidden within the sacred temple, hidden in an occult sense, even though the occult today is often associated with something else, like, I don't know, magic in a black magic sense, if anything, or something that is oppositive to Catholic tradition. Nothing more wrong, of course. Nevertheless, it's occult in the same way we just described, being fundamentally ignored by people. That's the only true occult reality. If there is any sort of conspiracy theory, it's about this, not the fact that, the terrible church is hiding you things, or it's all, this scheme, etc. Like, it's not, of course, like in the church, everybody's perfect. God forbid. Even that, in the sense that, we have to be perfect as the church of God, as Christendom. I was mostly talking about the Vatican memes and all that kind of sort of attitude stemming from general anti-papism that we often browse, also from a historical point of view. In any case, beyond the reach of profane eyes, and to the flame, all of Europe owes her vitality and the prolongation of her struggles. This is valid also for all those countries who sprang out of Europe, and that we call the West in this, again, conventional sense. I use a lot of conventions here so that it's easier for anyone to understand already the convoluted speech. From such concealed fire, sparks emerge, igniting crisis, and periodically rekindling the call for a return to humanity through various historical events of European nations examined through their intrinsic and genetic context rather than merely the superficial occurrences of facts and individuals. That's a bit all what we do historically wise on Schwerpunkt, but these are also topics that we've never really fully and in-depth browsed. Now, if the West can reunify with its traditional direction by embracing the pure spiritual values of humanity, the flame of Vesta will once again serve as an inexhaustible source for the traditional spirit's innovations. Conversely, if it were to extinguish permanently, it would signal the ultimate downfall of the West, of the world, and the twilight of the profound light of Rome in the end time, which acts as a mediator between the transient and the eternal, the human and the divine, and the worldly and the otherworldly, the Ragnarok and the twilight of the gods. In any case, in ways that, again, always prelude to always a last chance of redemption. That is the ultimate final struggle. Now, this cannot, as you understand, happen without losses, as the myth also says. However, it won't be the end. This is what we believe in as Catholics. Exactly in the measure in which the works are really a divine blessing for your merit and accomplishment. Now, the concept of tradition itself can often be misconstrued by contemporary individuals who tend to apply it indiscriminately, as we were saying before, to all external and, I don't know, what Marxists would say superstructural aspects, seeking to distance themselves from these in a spontaneous manner that can resemble a form of rebellion. So we're talking about the spiritual awareness, a more ideal view of reality, more fluid, a more realistic, also a more physical one, truly intended in the non-Cartesian way, and even less in a deterministic or materialistic fashion, right? And it is indeed true that such perspective, being so alien to today's awareness, may seem an act of rebellion, and being confused even worse with an act of, say, rejection of the order for the sake of it. Hence all the anti-sort of state. It's not even about being anti-statalistic, which is fine, but this notion that the hierarchy, the body politics, the sense of a hierarchical order where individual people are definitely located on the basis of their merits, rather than, of course, which may happen just, and always happens just by per se always, but in the moment in which cannot really rise these individuals, right, is also that a hierarchical in a conventionally earthly political and social sense. Hence communism, everybody flat, poor, equal in nothingness, right? So, and in worthlessness. That's exactly the point. So people are scared of hierarchy because at the end of the day, they perfectly know that if they do not incarnate it, it's because they're failure. And that's essentially why they're so phobic towards standards, towards actual knowledge, towards actual education. There's even a rejection of actual historical awareness or any subject discipline today you would define humanistic, beyond the fact that some universities, some institutions, many of them were raked by communism, etc. There is also a healthy hierarchy that still exists. It's not wishful thinking. I know that especially many of our I hate to put it in these terms because most of you are actually from the United States yourself, but I am very well aware that you don't believe at large this, but I did encounter so many people from there, and this mindset that this is always how it happens from the States. It will spill over. It has already spilled over into Europe. Is the notion that the entire institutions are rigged in that sense. This is just what the Cathars believed before they were rightfully exterminated, right? And it's always the same old story. People getting more lesser, they're being actually socialists at the end of the day, even when they call themselves conservatives, whining because they want to be parasitically maintained in a way or another, and narcissistically pretending that they are special for some reason. Look at what happened to the Cathars, again, the pure, whatever, and you'll get a beautiful depiction of what happens to Manichaeism. So this misunderstanding leads to a false notion of dynamism that contrasts with the static essence of tradition. However, because of course God is perfect, and so the entire action is per se just manifest through the eye of the divinity. It doesn't require change, right? In fact, this dynamism is really just an exploration within the realms of human and cosmic illusions, perpetually reverberating divine light, but in a ever dimmer fashion towards obscurity, whether coming from individuals or the collective. And so again, all the forces that are basically undermining the bigger efforts in power display, in actual manifestation of strength, etc., are exactly dooming themselves with just setting an example that others can consciously follow, like simply saying, okay, I actually have fear. They're all aiming at scaring you, right? Remember, there is nothing worse in tradition than fear. I mean, the entire sort of phenomenology of our own original sin and mortality is actual fear. I mean, if we're not impressed by some external agent with such lack of quality. We're perpetually reinforcing this on ourselves without ever stopping. If we stopped, we wouldn't have the problem. We wouldn't be mortal anymore. But that's what the entire point of this all really is. Now, even if we analyze the term dynamic in its true etymological sense, it relates more closely to the foundational truths of tradition, which are static and eternal, yet imply endless developments and integrations in the moment in which they take place in the realm of the lower nature, reflecting also the growing process within existence of becoming rooted in the center of original stability, when it is really upwards, when it is really providing with new energy, new force. Now, the fixity of tradition indeed suggests a richness of applications in order to achieve it, as divine truth serves as a focal point with numerous pathways leading toward it to its universal nature encompassing all accomplishment. We all have our own distinct path, but the aim is hopefully going to be the same. As we've seen with the other forces, we have the inversion of it. This is very important in struggle, because somebody who is trying to simply bring you down without allowing even for the confrontation with your greatest force is fundamentally trying to avoid not just reality and how it even occurs in an earthly situation. Like if you provoke someone in an actual sense, like you will trigger a response, and then this response may suck. I mean, depending on what we're talking about, let's say. But in general, there are cases in which much smaller forces deemed to be, irrelevant or to be done for are able to stem much larger ones, simply because those are not even thinking of taking the brunt of the fight, at least in a serious way and in a functional one, highlighting the fact that they're not really qualitative to begin with, and that's an issue as well. So the point is that those counterforces at large are bluffing, right? And that's the stupidest thing to do. I mean, to fall into their terrorism, into their attempt to just resort to these vile tricks because they can't take you on directly. The Temple of Vesta symbolizes the static aspect of tradition, because while the fire that burns in spirals of light signifies the active dynamic integration, each individual is called to achieve in their hearts, free from human impurities and in tune with the eternally creative rhythm of the universe. Remember, eternally rising as the king of the living. This was the symbology of the Sol Invictus, that far from being some kind of, again, orientalistic offshoot detached from European tradition, was already there, even in pre-Roman Italy, to the point of being properly recognized in the same fashion, naturally mirroring, embodying, representing the leader. Right, the leader has to constantly fight because he's the guy who's actually bridging the gap between the two natures, right? And so, just like the fire that is kept forever alive just out of this struggle, and so not just out of some magic because it sits there, you have perpetual motion and work. No, it's the product of the divine spark within mankind, right? Thus, this fire embodies what might be termed traditional dynamism, the practical effort individuals must exert to bring to life the seemingly unchanging and monotonous principles articulated by the traditional system that we're all called to achieve. Tradition is universally applicable. Thus, this is also what the great tradition of Romanity admonishes us about. You never have to underestimate anyone. All right, before actually realizing how he will actually underestimate himself, so that there are actually two separated natures, a fallen one and the first one. But if you don't aim to the higher one, in fact, you cannot even properly see the weakness of the lesser one. Thereby, tradition must be articulated in a manner devoid of personal characteristics, because it's absolute, because in its full accomplishment, the idea of a separated self from this vanishes, or at least expands to encompass the whole universe to a point that transcends your merely human, mortal sense of yourself. Nonetheless, each person needs to internalize the formula, ignite it with their inner fire, and transform it into a medium of transfiguration, an ongoing illumination that ascends from humanity to the divine, ultimately guiding humanity back to its purpose, which is the heavenly realm. Of course, everything that we can do in this current state is requiring a human perspective, characterized by imperfection. So our explanation, our action, our contemplation is, again, like in Vesta's fire, this process that will hopefully lift us up. Now, the need for tradition arises, of course, only as we confront the relativity of human existence. If you start thinking that everything you feel or think is fundamentally true, then we're going to have a problem, right? Not because any action does not have an absolute value. Every condition isn't inherently metaphysical, but because the only truth belongs to the heavenly nature. So what we're experiencing is faulty by definition, even when it definitely does exist. And so, as such, we must work in order to transcend it. This is an integral aspect of its own self-actualization. All traditions illuminate this stage accurately. However, Europe has, at some point, of course, developed a preferential path, right? It, as each one, of course, has at some point misinterpreted the significance of same tradition to a degree. And what is interesting, indeed, that is a double-edged sword. We've done this from a condition of dominance, right? And for centuries, we became acclimated, say, to attributing tradition to qualities that actually that actually lack, right? While by forgetting the actual initiatory path that allowed to do so. That's the reason why we talk about all those military historical topics, also the history of chivalry, knighthood, war bands, and so on, because they are effectively the closest that we have witnessed in historical times, and with outcomes that we can, in fact, directly. How many people actually do this? Connect to the later, for example. It was already true at the time, but say Western dominance in also greater, say, at least earthly manifestations in the following centuries, right? So paradoxically, like this happens in every path, in every people, in every culture. Say we began to attribute tradition qualities that it actually lacks, while negating those that it possesses. In doing so, just like a bad optical distortion, so that every ingredient is there, to put it quite banally. And even the pathway to the recipe are actually known, but it's as if you simply sat there and say, oh, well, okay, but I don't have to mind, I would just want to relax. That's what actually will take you over. That's actually what aging is. That's actually what the entire point of not enacting the perpetual fire constantly leads you to. And you see how normal for us it sounds, how we normalize it, even just from a physical point of view. Think about the principle especially the second principle of thermodynamics. And we are simply told, also in very materialistic terms, there is basically no way to go beyond that. And the entire tradition tells the opposite. So the scientific worldview in particular has contributed to this distortion, this the scientistic one, introducing the myth of nature, phenomenon, experience, and power as detached from one another. Just think about it conceptually. Like, this was all part of one being, and not just we detached from it in the cataclysmic fashion that brought to the fall, etc., but began also to chop it to pieces conceptually, to the point that we just mud waters are ever less able to see the whole process clearly. Again, it's always our fault. It's not like this is being done, and so there's not much we can do. Of course, we do bear the burden of our ancestors' sins on our shoulders, but it's not like this couldn't be reverted in an instant were we to nail the actual vision that is necessary to and acting upon it. In an unusual divergence, the concept of nature, for example, has expanded to be linked to the infinite, which is illogical because it is a creation constrained by time, space, and circumstance, conditions that, if removed, would negate its existence. Concurrently, humanity has been trivialized as though nature exists apart from humans, rather than being the very framework that outlines human experience and thus varies within its confines. In an effort to eliminate God from the equation, which was definitely as hotly pursued, a real shift of attributes from the divine domain to the human sphere has occurred, resulting in a tangled web of contradictions. All this because we had to deny that this divinity existed, which is, again, self-sabotage. That's what we were talking about before. It's denying the nature of power at its root and lying about its actual manifestation, convincing people that is somehow the case, just because the manifestation is not optimal, right? It's just are scientifically going to weaken further people in this way, not actually bringing them to any kind of higher level. Just think about this when referring to the aforementioned propaganda. It's not like there is any construct to this, there is any logic. We started to basically straight out lie about things, even when we actually know we're a click away from the actual articulate explanation. We'd prefer not to actually take it, right? It's that faulty, it's that evil from our side. This is, by the way, because the relationship between man and nature mirrors that of the dreamer in the dream, with the former being the source and condition of the latter. Think about this also when you actually dream, right? Both stem from ignorance, right? When ignorance is transcended, only the essence of God endures. So we definitely get a glimpse of that, right? As much as there is a spark within ourselves. And that's how the two natures actually do connect. We know that, right? Also, the oniric experience is very unique in that regard. It really speaks of some of the most profound levels that, however, are still rooted in our own mortality, not just the divine. While science, philosophy, and art, when viewed from a secular perspective, tend to obscure the realities of this dream and detract from humanity's rightful aim of returning to God, tradition elucidates and organizes this dream while looking forward to awakening. It enables us to perceive through the necessary illusion of mirage the genuine light of truth present in every expression of existence's illusions. Where individuals move without awareness, tradition itself highlights, anchors, and delineates the calls of both human and cosmic dreams, which can be seen as symbols serving as landmarks of truth amid the transitory phantoms that emerge and vanish along the journey of existence. Nothing that we experience is completely false or completely true, right? It's always in between, pure being and death. Life's fleeting nature itself mirrors this, as conveyed through tradition, providing a robust foundation for humanity's journey toward the higher nature, enabling individuals to transcend their finite existence and connect with the divine. This transformation depends on the evolution of ignorance into wisdom, so the completion of our knowledge, guided by the rich language of sacred symbols that reveal the path to truth and the profound mystery of humanity's union with God, an illustration of resolving the square into the circle. And so really going beyond what your immediate perception actually suggests. That's the path of the warrior and of the priest combined. In contrast to the superficial transactions of science, philosophy, and art, which operate within the confines of dreams without breaking free from them, tradition offers immeasurable value. While these fields may exhibit relentless pursuit, their efforts are ultimately constrained and unproductive because of the limitations inherent in their focus. The acknowledgement of science's relativity, by the way, grounded in common sense, underscores its provisional and hypothetical essence. Its practical applications are constrained to a narrow realm of phenomena, often misinterpreted in their superficial forms. Likewise, philosophy encounters dead ends when faced with extreme formulations that it cannot navigate. Genuine exploration commences where philosophical inquiry concludes. This profound and metaphysical quest belongs exclusively to sacred science, the ars regia, which underpins tradition. In my way, personally, it started with a strong, let's say, pain, disappointment, with the luxury of being able to handle that, and already at the time being you've tracked that on Schwerpunkt in the past years, doing that with a firm mind, as a matter of fact, but aching in that somatic dimension, and prompting me to, of course, to refine my spirit through the question of what needed to be done. And in that sense, it was really a path of contemplation that brought necessarily to action, to take on responsibility fully for all my mistakes. And without that, it's bitter, because it's not like you're immediately fixing anything. Actually could and will likely go all downhill anyway. That's what we've been struggling for so long to sort out, to avoid fundamentally. But there is a power that can be generated from this, and there is in fact even a extension of this through life itself, new generations, etc. So it's a very complex dynamic encompassing basically all existence, all people, all the world. Art perhaps reveals its inadequacy more openly than the other disciplines, driven by an intuition, right, albeit vague, that often recognizes the tenuousness of its domain. In the works of the most profound artists, echoes of deeper truths do emerge, perceived through the illusion of forms. Tradition embodies the science of truth, encompassing the entirety of human potential and guided by a cohesive direction through various stages of realization. In the video about the Hellenic cycle of Indo-European civilization, we've seen how what we normally attribute in a more modern secular sense, like the peak of Hellenic culture, to is this essentially explosion of forms, of art, of materialization, of expression, not the beautiful geometric painting, the essence of action, right, in self-actualization. And so we tend to appreciate, of course, art is a mean through that. It's not like it's a mean of contemplation, but anyway, it's necessary, again, but it does well illustrate how sort of illusory, even from a representative point of view, everything really is, because what we are looking at really is what it inspires in us, rather than the statue, the canvas, the sheer matter that is just arranged in a way that can inspire us some broader conceptions. Of course, like in tradition, these symbols are not empty. They're not void. They do own themselves. We've seen in the traditional meaning of space what kind of force actually does exist within matter itself, so that it's not really there for some weird reason separated from ourselves. It's actually part of this illusion. There isn't really a separation between spirit and matter. Life does exist in anything that conventionally we understand in existence. We perceive. We do have the capacity of seeing. That's also why science is that sort of availably open to the recognition of such existence, but through mostly some indicators that do not really question the essence, the metaphysical, in fact, essence of such phenomena. At the core of tradition lies the mystery of continuous transformation, symbolized in the Roman tradition of Vesta's fire. The sacred role of the Vestals, as we know, their unwavering vows and their reliance on the Pontifex Maximus, that, remember, was literally called like this because he was the king originally, because this all was one with the unity of the offices in the monarchic era. So was Romulus as the guy who again bridged, literally, wait, the Pontifex did build bridges in ancient Rome. Has anybody told you that that was not just they did, of course, also in material terms, but let's say what that actually meant and how was that shared by universal tradition, right? He bridged the two natures as a leader, eternally rising as the king of the living in that sort of regenerational capacity. That's why the guy controls, as we've seen also through the meaning of ritual and the awakening of the noumena, the vessels that had to unwaveringly control the fire, right? And in Romanity, this is incredibly beautiful because it heightens the tension between the virility and womanhood in the hierarchical relation here. The man here is so sure of these vestals that are veritably the same fire itself, the same transfigured souls of pure morality that are trusted to preserve the same process of transfiguration. Remember the idea of being bull of your own mother, being the creator of your own mother. That has also generated, this was necessary, remember, the compenetration of the two elements. It's never meant in a positive sense, as most politics is telling you falsely today. It's the full integration of that in the perfectly harmonious order that makes eternal life possible. And so this does invite reflection, even among those who superficially view the metaphysical and divine underpinnings of Roman identity as mere artistic motives, because that's fundamentally what personally I've ever encountered online. Like when people know about Jupiter, they know about the Roman religious practice, the general meanings behind it. It's not like you ever encounter someone who says, this is actually real, right? They mostly think, but this is something that these people believed back in the day, and like we don't do anymore because, I don't know, of science, whatever. They don't basic, or even if they want to make some kind of nostalgic, romantic look back at it in a cosplaying fashion, it doesn't go beyond, I want to feel like I'm special because I'm dressing up like a Roman, or this kind of things for reenactment, and really presenting it as an alternative even. I've met people who present that kind of, this is very typical actually, look at the same concept of paganism, which was completely adverse actually to the Catholic essence of Roman religion, as well as of the entire Indo-European one. So in an opposition, often anti-Christian, so it's completely out of, and of course people will not understand why the pre-Christian Roman religion continues in its Catholicism, in Christianity as well. Again, made videos about this. Always know that you can check that out. In any case, these attitudes are essentially demonstrating, also in a pretty dumb way if you think about it. If you hear we're talking about some kind of initiation, kind of some, cultural finesse or religious knowledge and, moral predisposition, also in terms of strictly scientific understanding, failing to recognize the depth of wisdom of religion in general and how this was historically articulated is a problem that actually could even fix, to an extent at least, especially in contemplation, just by studying the stuff, like having it in our own curricula. At school, at university, like it shouldn't be that difficult. Like, again, this stuff is known. It's not like it derives from an unknown world that nobody has ever heard of. It's literally the foundation of our own identity in the past, and also, of course, in a broader sense. But if even just the former was the starting point, it's very famous, at least it was up to our generation, a very conventional set of references, classical religion, something you can find also, I don't know, in 18th century royal palaces, frescoes, etc. Why do you think that the greatest monarchs in Europe stuck to that vision up to so late? And then what happened in the last couple of 100 years? Remember? That's the actual issue. And again, I will not start with that. Again, you know what I'm talking about. But the meaning there is pretty well known. Again, it doesn't even require any specific initiation. There were anti-traditionalists who knew the meaning of that and, of course, failed to acknowledge that such tradition was necessary. And they backfired against it because of the enormous cost that it requires. What I think here, as I was saying at the beginning of the video, is that I would like to put you in a sort of comfortable mode, at least in making you positive about the accessibility of this. That is to say, this enormous effort is an enormous effort you can lead in a lifetime, meaning not like that a lifetime per se is likely, at least considering our current situation, to be enough to do anything about the world, but still, right? Like that bet that you've made more, that you can, that you have destroyed fundamentally, and that you can earn that shot in the firmament that will make you present in the ranks of the last battle, right? And that will allow you to guide also people that are going to remain here when you're gone into that dimension. I mean, this is really important. It's really something that makes you hopeful and makes you see a point, makes you see maybe just a more modest point, but one that, for example, again, was particularly well understandable in the, and understood, I mean, up to like the last generations. Like, even if you watch, like, to say a dumb thing, but if you watch the Looney Tunes and the way in that cultural, pop cultural reality, just angel and devil were represented, and certain symbolism, certain vision of existence, it was so close to us, right? That's just a pale shadow, so to say, of the wall. But it was much closer than we imagined. What do you think people were so religious for in the past? What's the notion? I know I'm talking to people who are habituated to listen to stuff from me, so from the history of religion videos, we know what we're talking about, but like those who haven't seriously sat down at some point to think about this and still think that, I don't know, praying God is simply having somebody who makes you favor when you're in trouble, other than, having this spiritual reflection that can provide you with the power needed to fulfill God's will. That's a basic passage, and that's why it's important to recover. It's so useful in everyday life. At some point, I will talk about this because it's very different from what even like conventional religion for the average person, and only because of the average person is being perceived like. Now, going back to Vesta's fire symbolism, fire represents the fourth element. That is, as you know, deemed in alchemy also to be the noblest, right? It signifies transcendence and elevation. It's the Aries element. It's the rebooting of the cycle in spring. The ram, the virginal shot that has to spring out into the aetas, as the Romans called summer. It was also the season of war altogether from March, that in fact took the name of after Mars. In fact, we are almost to the equinox. It's just a coincidence. Anyway, this element signifies transcendence and elevation, symbolizing our return to a state of original perfection, embodied by the heavens, purification of the lower nature, hence also the virgin, right? The Vestal Virgin that is unwavering in this regard. That's the maintenance of the eternal divine power on the basis of this primal perfection, this unspoilment, this eternal youth and power. And Vesta's fire exists in two forms, like heat and flame, representing concentration and expansion, requiring a refined vessel like the earth or altar. This results in combustion, of course, from which both heat and flame arise, embodying the principle of transfiguration, an essential passage through form that produces a creative substance where the fiery potential remains intact at the same time. This is beautiful. This is a emanatistic concept that represents, in fact, God himself. This transfiguration symbolizes a dual process of death and life, of course, for the same regenerative and purifying principle, a bit like the phoenix, the demise of burned elements and the emergence of the heat from the flame that assumes the shape of light, articulated in a fiery triangle rising to heaven, importantly enough. The apex of this triangle, that is also depicted in, you've seen the Roman coins that I used in the pictures here, shifts according to the flame's direction as well, while its base is the earth, the site of combustion, so where the means are present for such purification to take place, and thus actually consuming, just like through war, resources, but creating others in the moment in which it is properly nailed in order to achieve that combustion that transforms rather than destroys, at least in an earthly perspective that may seem the case, but it's actually achieving more than it destroys, and through the same and higher mastering of this firepower. Now, destruction coincides with the generation of heat and flame. Thus, if we define that which is destroyed as human and that which arises as divine, then we must recognize the heart as the scene of transfiguration within a person, a crucial channel for fulfilling the mystery of transhumanization, so to say, the ultimate victory, universalization and divinization. This process represents a dynamic vortex coursing through all existence, transforming human darkness, symbolized in the sacred earth by the wood, fueling the flame, into divine light, the only illumination found in God. The journey of deification is communicated through sacred science, the ars regia with the Vestales, safeguarding the most profound symbols, among them fire, the transformative force that facilitates the human elevation through 6 ascending levels, corresponding to the sacred virgins. Remember this with the Vasquez, the 12 ones, and how much this power is derivative of the same sacred fire, and tamed by the most virile authority, and also the most sacred one on earth. Now, these virgins oversee the eternal flame, serving as continuous connection between the earthly realm and the divine, reflecting the harmonization of forms into rhythms, and rhythms into silence, ultimately, that, as you know, are part of the broader cosmic rite of consonance between the ardent psyche of the mind, in fact, and the luminous galactic forces that float above in the sky, in the celestial vault. Hence, this fire connects properly with the celestial one, with the one of the planets and of God. Through ascetic practices, this journey epitomizes ultimate liberation, of course, fully encompassing the divine cycle's eternity within a transfiguring unity. It is, of course, a full declaration of accepted self-sacrifice in holy combat, in the most uniquely sort of blazing and transfiguring. It's as if, again, in the way, I don't know, Romulus rose to heaven with a blaze, like the minimal prodigy of this perpetual fire being constantly present, not to leave the world into complete darkness and oblivion, and so dissolution, the destruction, death, saves the whole and allows humanity to continue in the steps of God. This is to God, importantly enough, through the heroes, through the leaders that accomplish this path already. So that's also why this fire, that of course is also metaphorical, is symbolizing the same awareness of the sacred in the heart of man, that is truly burning and allowing you for that sort of martyrizing process in the true meaning of martyr, which means witness, as you know. That is the evocative process of the darkest forces around you willingly, just to tame them and transfigure them, and having the Victoria, the Nike, appearing in front of you and annihilating your enemies, bringing your own transfigured soul to heaven as an accomplishment. So there is an increasing, an augmenting, always remember augere, what that means, meaning behind this. We have observed it also in the video about gladiators, right? The meaning of the gladiatorial munera and what stood behind those clashes in the wake of a senatorial, a senator's funeral, right? And so the passing of the imperium to another dimension. This is, in so many ways, just the spirit of the decursio and the realization that this full unity happens only when you really are that fully aware that power derives only from God. These reflections illustrate how much the contemporary world, diverted by an anti-traditional uprising with science at its historical core, has distanced itself from the eternal symbols of Rome and her ancient tradition, which accurately represents all aspects of revelation through the unifying integration of two traditional forms encapsulating truth. Just as fire has been harnessed by, you can say, modern civilization in domestic settings, particularly much of its profound significance has been lost. In antiquity, it symbolized, as we've seen, the hidden power latent within humanity, needing vigilant nurturing to sustain its flame so that transfiguration can occur. That's how you raise your children, transforming inner elements into light and flame, ultimately the Imperium manifests in its transfiguring power on earth to heaven. This illuminating power dispels ignorance's darkness, while the flame catalyzes a rebirth. So it's something that's passed on, that requires new sacrifice at each step of the way, essential for any victory over cosmic and human illusion. In other words, in this fire lays the secret of cosmic manifestation in our relation with God. It's a gateway to heaven. The fire of Vesta encapsulates the mystery of transfiguration, where the dreamlike illusion of existence is realized as divine life, so the fully perennially achieved one, man, shedding his flawed identity, dons the light as a result of complete ignification and reclaims his true nature, remaining a son of God in the unique and sovereign truth of the Lord. I don't know how much we're going to continue with similar topics in the near future, but of course I have a lot of content that we can essentially articulate from this stuff. Besides, we still haven't talked about Janus, we still haven't talked about the Lectorian Acts. The Roman tradition really provides us with an enormous treasure that can essentially decline any other notion in everyday life as much as in eternity. This is our task. This is why we are covering these topics, why it's so important to discuss them. At some point we will, if anything, study in more documentary terms, for example, I don't know, in this case, Vesta's meaning, etc. But if you wonder what this is fundamentally all about, this is it, right? There isn't much of a mystery behind the. Of course, there is a mystery in the way this was attained. It was really believed at the time that mostly derives from our own fault of not having predisposed ourselves to such understanding as we've seen. But at large, what we're witnessing here is crucially straightforward in the necessity of self-actualization through self-sacrifice in holy combat as a perennial state of being, right? One that has to burn through in order to purify entirely, and that therefore has to redeem all sin and allowing for a new regeneration. This is, of course, very collectively understood in the measure in which the possibility of divine power is infinite and immense, and not really responding to our own simple mathematical addition in this kind of scientistic, say, squaring of units that add up to one another, but that have a providential meaning that is naturally, of course, to be understood just in the full plenitude of the universe, and that very few can really look through. There is so much in this sense that we have to cover as a consequence in order just to even give an idea of what we're talking about. If anything, we're browsing the universe on Schwerpunkt, but it takes its time, its toll. But this is exactly what this is about. It's the dedication, is the commitment, is the determination, is the devotion. All right, that matters. Really hoping to achieve what becomes ever more evident that needs to be, and so being able to focus on it and getting straight to it. In any case, for today, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.